Thank you so much for staying with us. This is the AM show, and in reviewing the year, let's talk about the energy sector. And when we're done with that, we'll take some time in as well. As a few of the things that happened with the judiciary. And joining me this morning is Lom Nuku Ahlijah. He is a lawyer, a law lecturer as well, and an expert in the energy sector. Thank you so much. How have you been?
Thank you. I'm very fine.
You okay?
So far, so good.
2025, what has been your highlight?
In terms of the news or in general?
General.
It's been a good year, I would say, but I'm, of course, looking forward to a better 2026. There are many things that happened in this year which could be better, and I'm looking at how to reflect on them and make amends for the new year, which we are almost there as today's 31st. Yes.
Well, so the energy sector, just overview of it, 2025, would you say that it's been better, especially with what the current government inherited, or it's been worse? Do you usually have your lights on, by the way?
Absolutely, most of the time now. Of course, there are occasional, periods where the lights go off and so on, but it's not in the era of what we call doomsday, which is where you have like consistent power outages for sometimes days, weeks, months, and that obviously results in, for example, a load shedding timetable and all of that, where the challenge or the deficit with having the lights on is so persistent that it now goes beyond a regular period. Of course, in the distribution networks, there are challenges sometimes just with equipment and so on. So there are times when the lights do go off, but it is not in that frame. As we know. Generally speaking, I'll say that this year has been good for the energy sector, both in terms of power and also oil and gas. Generally, also, that has impacted tariffs, and as we know, the elements that go into computation of tariffs is because, the forex is one of the big ones, as well as petroleum prices on the world market and so on. So generally, it's been good. In terms of assessing this current government and what it has done, I'll say that we haven't had any major disruptions in the energy sector in this year, even though obviously there's always room for improvement.
Do you foresee that we still will incur a lot of debt? And of course, because they're trying to keep the lights on.
Yes.
And that will be purely goodwill. But do you foresee that years later, we're going to be singing the chorus of, well, in an attempt to keep the lights on, we have incurred this amount? Do you foresee that?
Well, first of all, we have to break it down because we have existing debts, which is legacy debts, which will not go away overnight. It will take quite some time to clear it because a lot needs to be done in terms of structural reforms to get that done. So beyond clearing the legacy debt, then the question is what will be done on a day-to-day basis to ensure that new debt is not accruing. And there are many factors that contribute to that, which we can dive into. But to answer your question, whether the debt will remain or whether in terms of actions that have been taken by the current government, the debt will be completely wiped away, it won't go away overnight. It will take quite some time. And I think the IMF has been talking about that. Of course, the government itself has been talking about that because that comes up quite strongly in the 2026 budget statement that was presented by the finance minister. There's still quite a long way to go in dealing with the debt. So, as I said, we have to look at what will go into it. Legacy debt is impacted by many things. For example, IPPs that had contracts with ECG, for example, had been supplying power to ECG for some time. There are times when, for example, gas supply is not available. There's a need to rely on liquid fuels, which are more expensive. That cost, for example, is on ECG, which indirectly means it's also on government. And then anytime those procurements need to be done, it will take us out of projections that are based on gas because liquid fuels are more expensive than gas. So anytime there are constraints with gas, then obviously it has impact for that. So you see also that in order to deal with that question, the government, for example, has proposed in the 2026 budget statement to look at setting up a new gas processing facility. All of that is just geared towards having cheaper fuel for the thermal plants because Ghana today is heavily dependent on thermal generation rather than hydro, which was the case historically. And so For the debt conversation, we are
it's quite wide.
Yes,
I recall that earlier this year, IPPs were threatening that we're going to shut down. Yes. But later this year, the government says that it has renegotiated. And in fact, they say that they have saved about $300 million in renegotiation. When, from an expert's view, when a government says that they've renegotiated, what does it mean? Does it mean that they have said that forgive us our debt, or reduce the service that you're rendering to us? What does the renegotiation, what form and shape does it take? Okay,
so we don't have all the details, but at least we know for a fact that all the IPPs have contracts with ECG, for example, as an off-taker, and then they may have other types of agreements that may even involve the government, like guarantees, parliamentary approval being given for specific projects and so on. Some of them have maybe tax reliefs and all of that, which Parliament approves. So renegotiation may look at the various agreements and what is in there which the two parties perhaps can agree to modify. So if we start off with, say, an agreement that an IPP will have with ECG, for example, it may have a power purchase agreement. So the power purchase agreement is the agreement that deals with the terms that will govern production of the power, the cost, the tariff elements, and so on. So you can negotiate, for example, the price. You can negotiate the duration.
Okay.
You can negotiate some of the key terms in terms of how you pay, for example, timelines for payment, and so on. Other factors could include maybe in terms of maybe the risk allocation, because in agreements or contracts, essentially what the parties are doing is to allocate risks. So, as I mentioned, fuel risk typically will be on ECG, indirectly government, and so on. So, it is a bouquet of terms and conditions that they will look at in coming to the renegotiation. So, when government says that through the renegotiation they'll be able to save $300 million, what we can understand that to mean is that they've quantified the renegotiation and the impact on the books, which means that $300 million would have been paid under the existing contracts, but because of the renegotiation, they have more room, perhaps in terms of time and so on, or even the elements. Because with the IPPs, as you mentioned, the reason why in the past there have been threats of shutting down, we are not going to provide power and so on, which indeed they have actually carried out some of those threats before, is because you're not getting paid. You're not getting paid, and if you're not getting paid, then it doesn't make sense for them to continue to run the generators and so on.
What do you think is the missing gap in our energy sector? We'll put that question here, but it'll bring to the fore the conversation of ESLA. Since ESLA was established, or since we started ESLA, would you say that it's lived up to its purpose?
Well, it has done some, but not quite enough, because, as I mentioned, the legacy debt remains. We are doing better in terms of the debt, because you can see that year, at least between 2025 and projected for 2026, we are doing better in terms of the debt. And the renegotiation also helps to reduce that debt, because all the savings that could be made from renegotiation would have impacted, obviously, how much government will pay, ECG and all other players will pay. So ESLA is to help plug the hole. So we've been collecting ESLA since 2015. This year we know there was an amendment to do the 1 cedi on fuel and so on. All of that is still geared to plugging the hole. But the hole is not a stagnant hole. In other words, you can't fix the debt at a particular figure and then use ESLA to pay it at that end. Because even as we speak right now, IPPs are working. If at the end of this month they are not paid, there will be a build-up in the debt as well. I know things are much better now with the cash waterfall mechanism being implemented, because that allows for the various players in the energy sector, particularly with power, to be paid more equitably. But even that, there's still a gap. And the gap, as you ask your question, will remain because to the extent that ECG, for example, does not collect as much as it has to pay out, there'll always be a gap. And which obviously brings the question, why is ECG not able to collect enough? One hand of it is the commercial losses, simply put, theft. Because if IPPs and VRA, other public utilities like Power, are generating, for example, 100 million cedis worth of power to ECG on a monthly basis, which ECG automatically is sending out to us consumers at home, in factories and so on. When people steal power, what it means is that they can't collect 100 million.
Does the amount that people steal really impact as opposed to higher commercial institutions not paying for this? For example, you hear that a big ministry or a big institution owes ECG this amount of money. The two, which one is really the most impactful one? We can separate it there.
Yes, that's a tough one because it has to be data driven. So in terms of being very specific as to which one is better, I'm not quite sure what the data speaks to in terms of research. But I can also just offer this suggestion that the theft is also significant because it is on a very pervasive level, right?
Okay.
And so there are times when even ECG is not aware of the theft till much later. So you realize that even in the past when attempts have been made to clamp down on it, months and months of it, you still find that they keep finding new places, new institutions and so on. So that's on the one hand. Now, when it comes to government institutions and entities who are owing, obviously that's also a big one because we are in a situation or a country where sometimes it's difficult for maybe a utility like ECG to turn off some of these government institutions because they are supposed to be critical institutions, they need the power for their work and so on and so forth. But someone must pay for it. So long as that ministry or agency or state institution is not paying, it continues to add to the debt. And that's what I'm saying, that the energy sector debt issue is not something that can...
Do you think that if tariffs were lower, people would pay more and would not want to steal?
Perhaps so, but as you know, the tariff conversation also must be tied to the economics of it. So anytime...
Maybe you want to open the pool.
Yes.
If you have 80 people who will pay you 1 cedi and you're likely to get that 1 cedi, it will be very difficult to get 20 people who will pay you 1,000 Ghana cedis. So you open up the pool. Well, tariff is very small, but everybody can pay. Because usually the common thing you hear is because it's high. And me top prepaid the next thing you want to think about is want to bypass or theft or whichever way. Do you think that if at least whether the consequences will be on government if that tariff adjustment, because I really never see PRCU adjust it lower. It's either at the same point or higher. If it's reduced, would it allow many people to want to pay?
Well, theoretically, yes. Theoretically, it should be possible.
But practically,
but I
could
don't
be different.
think. Yes, I don't think so because, I mean, even let's move away from, let's say, power. People still steal in general, even in other contexts. So we need to be very careful. This is the kind of thing that we need to get more detailed information on. But I just think that generally there are many things that people can do, even in terms of tariff, whether it is high or not, because when it comes to electricity, a lot depends on you and how you consume it. There are many things you can do, for example, in your home to make your home more efficient. Instead of using a warm bulb, for example, you use LED, which is the brighter white light and so on. There are different types of appliances. Energy Commission regulations require that appliances be labeled with their energy efficiency. So you see that, for example, when you're going to buy, let's say, a fridge or a microwave, there's a sticker on it with the stars. So, for example, when you're buying a product like that, you can look out for the more efficient one. So power consumption is very much in the control of individual or company that is using it. So there's a lot you can do to impact how you use it and so on. But obviously we can talk about the tariff conversation because that's a big one and there are many elements and dimensions of it.
Before we go to the tariff conversation and what usually PRC will look at to want to adjust is, let's get a clear difference between the ESLA and the cash waterfall mechanism. I confuse it myself, and I think many people as well watching me would confuse it. What's the clear difference?
So ESLA is essentially energy sector levy. It is based on an act of parliament which was passed to allow government to apply a levy on different products, get that revenue and use it to offset part of the legacy debt of the power and energy sectors, right? On the other hand, the cash waterfall mechanism essentially is like a formula where when collections are made by distribution utilities like ECG, they pay according to that formula. Why the need for the formula? Because, as I said, when generating companies are generating maybe 100 million cedis worth of power in a month, that must be transmitted by the transmission company. That's Gridco. It goes to the distribution company, and then obviously they also send it out to homes and businesses and so on. Now, ECG, when it collects from consumers, must pay Gridco for transmitting it, must pay the IPPs for generating it, must pay fuel suppliers for supplying fuel, must pay every stakeholder in the value chain. So the cash waterfall mechanism enables all those players to be identified and then a formula agreed and put in place. So once collection is done, you basically put the amount in the formula, how much ECG has collected for, say, December 2025, and automatically to let you know what should go to Gridco, what should go to ECG itself, what should go to the various.
It's not done based on need-based or who needs to be paid first, or that has been computed in the formula already.
Yes, so the formula came into the existence because, as I said, they are not collecting enough. So that's one of the major challenges why the debt continues. And I'll just expatiate on that in a little bit. But what happens is that if ECG, for example, Gridco submits a bill to ECG for how much it transmitted, because there's a way of metering how much they should charge. So if Gridco submits a bill of, say, 20 million cedis a month to ECG, ideally, as a business, you pay them 20 million cedis. But here's a case where, as I said, there are challenges downstream. So ECG is not able to collect enough to pay Gridco fully, pay IPPs fully, pay gas suppliers fully, pay VRA fully, pay Power fully. So the mechanism enables everybody to get an equitable share. How does the formula do that? The formula essentially has been developed and built in to look at the various players and their relative contribution to that value chain, so that we know that, oh, maybe 5% should go to this player, 10% should go to that player, 3% to that. So that at the end of the day, they all get much more. Now, you recall that in recent past, there were issues. In fact, there was a report that was done by PwC, for example, on ECG collections and the fact that they had several accounts and so on. That's part of it, because in the past, what used to happen was that ECG was exercising a lot of discretion in terms of who it will pay. So they could collect that 100 million a month and decide that this one will not even pay Gridco, or will pay them 1 million, even though their bill is 20 million. So the mechanism, the cash waterfall mechanism, takes the discretion away. It simply says, if you call 100 million, let's plug it in and let everybody get their fair share. Otherwise, what you have is that ECG can decide, today I want to give you 1 million, tomorrow I'll give you 2 million, even though your bill is 20 million. And then obviously it will be piling up, because if you don't pay fully a bill, next month another bill will come, and so on and so forth. And all of that will contribute and add to the debt, which is why I was making the point earlier that until the issues related to collections and losses and inefficiencies on the distribution side are dealt with, we might continue.
The IMF is definitely right when it projects that 2026, the shortfall will be about 1 billion. It means that what you have just said, it's not even surprising. If we keep going like this, 2027, we can also still project certain shortfalls. But I would have thought that with the way they can renegotiate with IPPs, with the strategies that they have come in place, the flat rate 1 Ghana cedis on a liter of fuel as well, I thought all of that will consolidate. 1 billion is quite a substantial amount, or it is projection, and so we shouldn't be quite concerned.
We should always be concerned, because the energy sector debt is historical. It has been with us for some time and will continue. The only thing is that every intervention that government makes has an impact to reduce that debt. So it's true, IMF has said 1.1 billion, that's a projection. So based on things that, for example, the government will do between now and end of 2026, when we are doing a review, we'll be able to tell whether, for example, they're able to shave off some of the 1.1 billion. And let me give you an example. One of the reasons why that 1.1 billion exists, there are many factors, but I'll just talk about a few. One of them is that there's a projection in that 1.1 billion about the fact that government itself may require liquid fuel at some point. Because if you don't have gas supply, if Atuabo is on maintenance, if NGAS has an issue, there are times when they go off, when we don't pay enough, there are times when they threaten, and they actually go ahead and reduce gas supply to Ghana. So anytime that happens and government has to rely on liquid fuel, which is more expensive, essentially what is happening is that we are paying more to get a fuel source which we could have gotten a cheaper one. So if, as I mentioned, in the 2026 budget, we've proposed that we're going to start construction of a gas processing plant, which means that at some point when that plant is completed and we are taking more gas from Ghana, from the Jubilee fields and so on, then it means that we'll have more gas and less reliance on heavy fuels or liquid fuels, which means that it could shave off down the line.
Okay.
Apart from that, I've also talked about the fact that there's significant losses, commercial and technical, on the ECG side. So the commercial includes the thefts, as I said. So if ECG, for example, is able to reduce in a significant way the amount of power that people are stealing, it means there's more collection, which means less debt. On the technical side, technical losses basically is just based on the kind of equipment, the efficiencies of the equipment.
Is that significant?
Significant. Between commercial and technical, we're talking between 20-30% of ECG's revenue that is basically dissipated because they are not collecting that much.
Okay.
Which means that if they can improve on the technical losses, they are saving money. Which means less of the debt.
Which one do they have quite an absolute control over? Collection and the technical. And explain the technical. Is it equipment, personnel, the things that they need to run?
Yes.
Okay.
So the way electricity works, for example, is that because it goes through machines, the lines, the transformers, and so on, you will by all means lose some. You can't transmit 1 megawatt at the start and then end up with 1 megawatt at the end. Just by the sheer nature of machines and equipment, there's some resistance in them. So you will lose some of it. Now, when it is technical, it should be within an appreciable level. So, for example, when the Energy Commission is approving tariffs, they give targets to the various utilities so that you kind of work on ensuring that you are within what is acceptable. Generally, we are talking less than 5%. But it all depends on the kind of procurement you're doing. What kind of machines are you buying? Where are you buying them from? Are they good quality? Are they not good quality? Do they go off often? What kind of issues do you have in terms of how frequently you have to maintain them and so on? Do they break down often? So the more you have challenges with what equipment you have put in, you also increase your technical losses. That's on the one hand, and of course, as I mentioned, the
commercial losses. Let's talk about one that concerns some of us directly, tariffs. Yeah. What in God's name goes into the tariff adjustment? And it's as if PRC is just notorious for increasing, but not necessarily reducing. Remind me if they've ever reduced, but I haven't seen that yet. Of course, there's some days that they will not at all even adjust it. They just say that for water, for example, we're not adjusting it. But what really goes into the tariff adjustment?
It's a lot.
Plenty, eh?
A lot. In fact, one of the things that PRC needs to do better is to publish more detailed reasoning for when it publishes the tariffs. It's best practice all over the world for the decision about tariffs to be explained in more detail. So you see, for example, the releases that are given. In the recent one, for example, we talked about just a little under 10% for electricity, up to 15% for water. That press release is not enough. It should be more detailed than that, and that's best practice. The reason is because I've seen that some groups in Ghana, including the TUC and so on, have raised issues and so on. When I listen to some of the concern, I realize that it's because there's a deficit in the knowledge, right? Because the kind of explanation that should go into the publication of the tariffs should be much more. So that's one of the first things I'll say. Now let's delve into what you just asked. Forex is one big one. What your CD to dollar rate is, for example. And in the energy sector, that is big because a lot of our inputs for energy are from outside Ghana. Not heavy, for example, high voltage transmission equipment, transformers, the kinds of things that you use in producing electricity are mainly produced outside Ghana. So if you take most of the public utilities and you look at their books, their annual reports, you see that a significant loss item for them is foreign exchange losses because they have to collect in cedis and then they have to buy things in dollars. So every time that you have that gap between the CD to dollar ratio being 10 and then moving to 15, that 5 cedis will be a big impact.
So if the dollar say stabilizes, as we're saying, because we've seen that the dollar is not as it was last year, yes, but the tariff keeps increasing, or there are other factors, so they now come in.
The other factors, as I said, it's multifaceted. So the forex is one, right? We're talking about even the cost of fuel, the gas, liquid fuels, the petroleum, different elements of that. We are looking at the economics, what inflation is, what the micro indicators are in the country. We are looking at things related to what kind of investment are required, because to keep the lights on today, as we have, is because investments have been made. And to keep it up or on in the future, we need to invest today. So,
but it's never ending because you have just also slapped one Ghana cedis flat rate for me to pay.
Yes.
That I will not be able to dodge. If I am I own a car, I will buy it directly. If I'm taking a commercial car, by all means, yes, it will be taken to me. I would pay it. But at least paying for your electricity at home, somebody can bypass that. So let's just say that it is one of the major contributors to their debt.
Yes.
But you're curing it with the one that I cannot bypass. I cannot stop.
Yes, but remember that the cure is not enough to plug the hole. So what we are collecting through ESLA will not automatically solve the debt problem because the debt is more significant. If government really wants to pay off that debt today, I'm sure we will start complaining because it won't be one cedi, maybe hundreds of cedis, right? So what this government has done, and of course even from previous governments, is to impose levies that will be easy for people to pay, relatively low impact, and then with time,
the tariffs.
Well, government is not directly responsible for increasing the tariffs. That's the PRC. Of course, it's an institution set up by statute and so on. But let's give the regulator its regulatory independence. They determine the tariffs based on the factors. And that's why I was saying that beyond the economics, beyond inflation, beyond forex, beyond and so on, the PRC also needs to incentivize the utilities to invest in the future. You know why? If tariffs are not given, it means that there will be no new investments, for example. And 5 years from today, we might still come back to have this conversation about why the lights are not being on and why there's another doom, so and so on. So tariffs are not only about today, they are also about the future. Now, you recall that the various utilities that requested tariff increments, because they all have to submit their proposals to PRC for the tariff. Some were looking...
Oh, is that the norm?
Yes.
The utility bodies would have to submit a proposal to PRC for them to consider. Okay.
Yes. The reason is because tariffs, or let's say electricity tariffs, are not left in the hands of the utilities alone. It's a general, if I should say, approach across the world. It's not like maybe me having my private business, maybe I'm doing a pure water business and I can sell it at whatever price I want. No. Power is always heavily regulated. So PRC will invite the utilities to submit proposals. So we will send their proposal, VRA will send their proposal, ECG, NETCO, all of them. And that will be subject to review. So the PRC is not making a determination by itself. There's even public consultation. So they are meeting stakeholders, AGI, TUC, ordinary citizens. They have town hall and say, come and express your views on the proposal. Then you go to the PRC website, all the proposals are there. You can read them, you can see. And as I mentioned, ECG, for example, was seeking over 200% increment in tariff. Over 200%. What PRC approved is just under 10%.
Hey.
You see the difference is significant.
But did it really mean that it wanted 200%? It's as if those who can pay, they charge them more, because they know that even if they increased it by 200, if they wanted that increase and it was granted, not everybody could pay.
Yes, but that's why it will not also be granted, because it's not dependent on their view alone. Because ECG or VRA or Gridco, any of them are looking at, from their perspective, what do I need to keep the lights on and ensure that even in the future I've put in investments so that the lights will always be on. But that determination is from their perspective alone, Gridco, ECG, and so on. Now, the regulator's job is to look at the entire sector, look at their various proposals, see how they fit into the scheme of things, how the economics of the country is, inflation levels, the views of stakeholders, what is realistic. I've already talked about the inefficiencies.
Yes.
If you are inefficient, you are making losses, the regulator is not going to reward you by giving you what you requested, because essentially what it means is that you remain inefficient. There's no motivation for you to drive down cost. But when you've asked for 200% and you've been given 10%, all of a sudden you see that management of ECG has to start thinking about how we're going to chase those who are stealing. How are we going to, because they have to consciously take decisions that will enable them to still get more revenue to achieve the targets that they have. Because apart from the Energy Commission, regulating the technical side of things, or even the PRC also are regulating the tariffs, all these public utilities still have another body which they are accountable to, and that's SIGA, the State Interest and Governance Authority. They have to sign performance contracts and so on. And through those contracts, they have targets to meet, which include reducing the inefficiencies and so on. And that's why I was saying that the projection in terms of what the deficit will be for 2026 will be a projection, because there are various elements of it that can be controlled based on the right decisions being taken, which includes what you do with the tariff, how you improve efficiency. For example, if you can, as a public utility, work with 500 workers, will you need 700? Those are decisions that have to be made so that you are constantly reducing costs, being more efficient, buying good equipment, ensuring that you are not, through your actions, exacerbating the situation and then increasing the debt.
It brings to the further conversation of privatization of ECG. What's your take, by the way? Should ECG just be privatized, or some parts of it on the chain?
Absolutely, some parts of it.
Why not?
I wouldn't say 100%, because, the issue of, as I said, electricity is a political question in one respect. In the same aspect to it's also a national security conversation as well, because power is really one of those things that you want sovereign control over, even though in other countries they're able to go fully private and so on. But that has not been our situation. So we have to look at our Ghanaian context and what will work. So you recall that a few moments ago I talked about the fact that the major challenges are with collections, are with inefficiencies, the losses, and also in terms of procurements and how equipment and so on are acquired, or how these things are entered into. So some form of privatization in that regard will not be bad, because if you give a private person, for example, a target to collect, they are perhaps more aggressive in collection. So that's something that perhaps there can be private participation in. We are talking also about the inefficiencies. These inefficiencies that have existed with these public utilities over time, how aggressively have they reduced them? Perhaps if there's participation from private sector in reduction of inefficiencies, they might be more aggressive. And the reason is because with private sector players, you are likely to give them contracts which are tied to performance. Right now you have technical and commercial losses of 30%. If you can reduce it 25%, you get X. If you can reduce it 20%, you get X. And you know, private sector people, I'm sure we all know, at least just from being in Ghana, that private sector players tend to be more aggressive with getting their money than the state. So there's a part to play for both sides. So I wouldn't say we should sell it off or privatize it 100%, but there are elements that we can consider privatizing, which could include collections and also how to reduce inefficiencies and so on.
Okay. I mean, finally, the energy sector, moving forward, 2026, what are your expectations for the energy sector?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, this year has been quite stable and good. And I think a lot of that has been predicated on some of the, let's say, the factors that are at play in the country and also driven by what government is doing. I'm quite excited about some of the things I saw in the budget statement for 2026, the gas plant coming up, mini hydro projects, a number of off-grid projects for local communities that are not connected to the national grid. So for me, once those plans are implemented as they have been indicated, then we have a good outlook for next year. Obviously, the impact of tariffs are dependent on the inputs I mentioned. So, for example, the forex situation. So, if we continue to have a stable, cedi to dollar rate, then obviously that will be good for us in 2026. And we know that it's a big challenge for governments to maintain that. But they have been doing quite well in this year because currently, as you mentioned, we are looking at $1 to just above 10 cedis, which is good. If we can maintain that or even get it lower, that will have a big impact on tariffs and the power sector in general so that we can have the lights on. Yes.
Let's spend a few minutes on the legal system of this country, especially, 2025 delivered very rare moments. Politically, it brought back a former president.
Yes.
Then as well, it removed a sitting Chief Justice.
Yes.
There's been a lot of argument about how Article 146 was applied. If you just a casual look at it, do you think there's any challenge with Article 146 that should be revisited? Do you think that Article 146 in its nature made the removal of a Chief Justice quite easy?
I wouldn't say.
I mean, maybe I should ask you your highlight, the judiciary, your highlight, 2025.
A lot. Well, you've talked about one, the Chief Justice removal. Quite, if I should say, it doesn't happen every day. So when it happens, obviously, that's one of the big ones. There have been other conversations around OSP investigations. Obviously, oral is also a big one that everybody is talking about because there's a lot of expectation in terms of prosecutions for persons who may have engaged in some, corruption and so on. Apart from that, we have the CRC report, Constitution Review Committee report, which is also quite significant in the legal landscape because we are looking at continuation of a conversation that started many years ago. And I'm sure when we touch on it specifically, I can delve into that. So I'll say that these are my key highlights for 2025. And
which one would you like to start with?
I think let's start with the Article 146 conversation. So first off, it is not easy to remove a Chief Justice. I think that point needs to be made quite clear because many attempts have been made in the past and which did not result in a removal. So it is not, let's say, easy, as maybe you mentioned that people are saying Article 146 is easy. It's not easy. It's all dependent on the facts that needs to be considered. I've heard lots of discussions around 146, and honestly, when I look at it, 146 is one of the most straightforward articles in the Constitution. It's actually quite clear, even though, of course, the Supreme Court in the past, through judicial pronouncements, has, enhanced 146 a little bit. But the honest truth is that it's a very simple process. If the removal has to do with the Chief Justice, the process involves the President, the Council of States, a committee being set up when indeed a prima facie determination is made on advice of the Council of State. And the committee will complete its work, make recommendations, which the President should act in accordance with. If it is not a Chief Justice, another Justice of the Superior Court, or someone in a position which is, let's say, akin to a Justice of the Superior Court, then the Chief Justice is the one who is in charge of that process and not the President. So the provision actually makes it such that the Chief Justice has control over removal of other justices, and this process has been used to remove judges before. If you recall, the ANAS investigation that on the judiciary and some bribery and corruption issues, it was impacted there. We've recalled the removal of the Electoral Commission chairperson and so on. So 146 has been used variously, but as you said, so in those instances, the Chief Justice is in charge because that does not involve the Chief Justice directly. So what the article does then is to say, when it is the Chief Justice, then...
Maybe the part that many people thought we should pay attention to is what amounts to stated misconduct or stated misbehavior.
Well, so it's judicially determined because the Constitution itself doesn't define.
Is that where the problem is? Is that where the problem could be? Again,
I don't think there's a problem there because, like I said, this process has been used many times in the past. What is different now?
The concerns that the actions, of course, the travel and the other nuances that came up with it existed before. The travel policy on which she then traveled with her family. Other Chief Justices existed, and then they used the same travel policy. So it will mean that she was the one that had to fall victim of it. So if the other Chief Justices that were in office previously, if somebody as well petitioned, then they were also going to fall prey to that.
Again, let's take a step back. I always say that because we need to get some basics before we build on it. Firstly, the Constitution, in the framers' reasoning, sought to make the Article 146 process an in-camera proceeding, which simply means that it is not proceedings that will be in the glare of the public. The reason, or one of the reasons for taking that approach is because you know that when certain conversations are being had about the judiciary in the public, the details can impact public confidence a lot. Because, you know, we say that the judiciary is the last arbiter. When we have a dispute, when the parliament has issue with the executive with parliament, citizens with the executive and so on, we all go to the judiciary as the last resort. In other words, when the courts pronounce on that matter, we take it. It can go all the way to the Supreme Court, but eventually there will be finality. So when there's an issue involving the judiciary or people who are on the rank similar to the Justice of the Superior Court, when you hold it in public, the level of detail, the accusations, what they did not do, it has a big impact on undermining public confidence in the judiciary. So the reasoning which went behind making Article 146 an in-camera process is to ensure that the committee, which will be made up of people who know what they are doing, what they are about, will be able to make a determination on our blind side, which is based on facts. So the truth is that everything we've been discussing in the public is not what happened in the committee. Yes, we've seen some documents that were leaked as petitions.
She herself has addressed the media, shared her experiences.
She has shared her experiences and so on. But you can't rely even on those petitions, what we've seen in the media, as what was submitted to the committee.
Okay.
Because even when the committee invites any of those petitioners or even the Chief Justice, what they wrote to the committee may even be different. Even if it's one paragraph, you don't know how it impacts the outcome. So basically what I'm saying is that 146 is an in-camera proceeding for a reason, and that reason still stands. So our discussions are not based on entirely what happened there. Just talking about what's in the public.
You also say that 146 is quite a straightforward provision in the Constitution, but I'm not sure that I saw that it also, but you see that her removal also amounted to removal from the bench.
Okay.
That I don't
as
think,
a member of
as
the
a
court,
member, yes, of the court, I'd say. I didn't see that specifically as well outlined in Article 146, or these are implied.
Well, so what Article 146 does in terms of the grounds, okay, for removal, those grounds apply to both a justice of the Superior Court and the Chief Justice, who is also a justice of the Superior Court. So in Article 146, there's no distinction between the requirement to remove a Chief Justice as against removing any other Justice of the Superior Court. And here, by Justice of the Superior Court, I mean from High Court up. So not only a Supreme Court judge.
Okay.
So if, for example, the determination is that the conduct, for example, of the Chief Justice breach stated misbehavior in terms of the criteria, what it means is that even if she was not a Chief Justice, she would have breached the same provision. So the standard is not different whether you're a Chief Justice or not. If you cannot be a Justice of the Superior Court because of what you've done, determined by the committee, you obviously cannot be a Chief Justice because you are Chief Justice because you are first a Justice of the Superior Court. In fact, even when the President, assuming there's even a vacancy in the Chief Justice position, the President wants to appoint someone from outside the judiciary, you have to be sworn in as a Justice of the Superior Court.
What did that whole move by, what did that whole decision or her removal, what did it do to the judiciary for you? Did it strengthen it? Do you think that it amounts to a little form of weakening it at all? What did it do for you?
Okay, so in my view, it is an interesting question, I'll say. And in my view, I'll say that the impact is that it makes everybody in the judiciary know that you are subject to the same scrutiny. That's because when we go to court as counsel, or when private citizens or companies and so on go to court, we are essentially in the hands of the judge. So the judges are the arbiters. They determine consequences, who goes to jail, who doesn't go to jail, and so on and so forth. But the judges also are subject to scrutiny. In other words, as we say, who watches the watchman? They are holding everybody account in terms of their role as judiciary, but they also need to know and understand that whatever you do will be subject to scrutiny. Because what the Constitution does simply is to say anybody can file a petition. Anybody. You don't need to be a lawyer to file a petition for removal of Chief Justice. If you see something that you don't like, which you consult, for example, and you find that it breaches any of the requirements of 146, anybody. So I've heard recently that other petitions have been submitted.
Yeah.
Respect to
removal of the SP.
Yes, the SP also. EC? Even there was even one that was submitted for removal of the current Chief Justice as well. Yes. Yeah. So that's the thing. And the reason why that is important. We are not when it comes to removal of a Justice of the Superior Court or any other person in that position. The reason why it is open is because justice, first of all, emanates from the people. This is a republic. So power is in the hands of us, the ordinary citizens. It is not reserved for a special group of people that will say only lawyers can file a petition for removal of the Chief Justice. Anybody can file a petition.
What's your assessment of the Office of the Special Prosecutor?
Well...
is it an office worth keeping?
I think so. I think so for now. The reason being that, there is a lot of conversation and discussions that went into setting up that office. If you recall, of course, this office was set up in the last administration, but what we all know, at least in the legal fraternity, is that the conversation about creating an independent prosecutor has been under discussion for years, decades, I'll say, actually. The reason being that there's always this tension between the belief that Attorney General, being a political appointee, will be able to hold the same standard when it comes to members of his political party. So in the public space, CSOs have made discussion, many fora have been held on this point. So for me, setting up the OSP is a test. We need to check whether it will work or not. Because if it works, right?
It's been some years.
It's been some, yes. So I'm coming to that part. As far as I'm concerned, we have not gotten to a point where it needs to be scrapped because we haven't seen it in full operation to the end. The first SP who was appointed resigned after a very short while. The next person who was appointed has not exhausted their initial 7-year term. I know that there are petitions that have been submitted for removal of the SP, and we don't know what will happen with that process. But at least, as I'm saying, the relevance of the institution, for me, it would be good to get one cycle.
But the nature of the nature of its mandate and how it seems to have independence, but still has to derive a certain legitimacy from the Attorney General, does it allow the office to function properly? Or the idea of us having an office of a special prosecutor is just enough? We want to have a perception of we're fighting corruption, but really the office is just a caricature of an office. Yeah.
I think that is not a fair assessment. And I'll say so because it's true. Under the Constitution, it is the Attorney General that has the power mandate to prosecute all criminal offenses. But as you know, the Attorney General cannot do that alone. So even aside the SP, the Attorney General delegates prosecutorial powers to other institutions. That's why, for example, the police are able to prosecute. They are police prosecutors. Yeah. Why do they prosecute? They prosecute because the Attorney General allows them to.
Okay.
All the state attorneys and so on, they are essentially deriving power from that.
So the Office of Special Prosecutor should
be able to
do as
yes, because the Constitution, unless that Article 88 is amended to say that prosecutorial powers are not only the Attorney General and it could be in other persons designated by, say, the Constitution or through an Act of Parliament. As it stands today, every prosecution is at the behest of the Attorney General. And like I say, apart from the SP, all the other bodies or institutions that have, for example, SNIT is able to prosecute you when you don't pay.
Sure.
They're able to do that because the Attorney General allows them to do that by delegated power. So it's the same way in which the SP has the mandate from the Attorney General.
I just was wrapping up the conversation before I remember that you have authored a book.
Yes.
Ghana Energy Law
and Policy, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's all about the power sector.
What's the book supposed to do?
Well, I think...
Who needs that book?
Who needs that book? Okay, so policy, anybody in the public space, I would say generally, if you're a policy maker, obviously a lawyer, and even an ordinary citizen interested in the power sector. Because I think even when we're having our conversation, you mentioned many times that there are certain aspects that people don't understand, they don't know the difference between so on. Because that sector is a bit removed from the ordinary person, I must say. All we know is that our lights are on or
it has to be on.
Yeah, so what I've done in that book is to digest fully what the power sector is about. So that's, the title is Ghana Energy Law and Policy, Electricity. So this is focused on electricity. And who knows, very soon I might have the oil and gas one out as well, which is the other aspect of the energy sector. But it explains everything from distribution, generation, transmission, who the various players are, how the stakeholders interact, tariff issues, how it's set, the criteria, why it needs to be reviewed every quarter, why there's a major tariff every 5 years and all. So it deals even with ECOWAS, like the sub-region as well, because Ghana is connected to Togo. We supply power to Togo, Benin. We supply power to Burkina, all of that.
And it's available?
It's available, yes.
Okay.
Many, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, and have yourself a happy new year.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're watching the AM show. Please stay, but quickly, let me just do some birthday wishes. From Fred Novo at the Ghana Revenue Authority, he says that, from the depth of my heart, I thank you for being an incredible wife to me and a loving, devoted mother to our children. On the special day of your birthday, the children and I want the whole world to know that you are a priceless gift from God, Jehovah, to our family. Your love, strength, and sacrifices give meaning to our lives, and we are deeply grateful for you every single day. We pray for long life, good health, and God's continued grace upon my life. Upon your life, from your husband, with all the love, Fred Nova. Happy birthday to you, except you didn't add the name. Okay, happy birthday, Emma Vivian Agama, wishing you a day as bright and beautiful as yours. And this is from Felicity Ahia Fenyo and your children. Happy birthday. Please stay with us. There's more on the show.